1 Samuel 25, we're looking at the story of David and Nabal. Nabal, the name means fool, and David, his men are camped around the edge of Nabal's property, and David and his needy followers are not slow to perceive that they have some measure of rights over the property of Nabal's. It's a deeper kind of not fair. They know it's Nabal's property, but they have protected Nabal's property and, in a sense, created the opportunity for the harvest to take place. Now they want to share. So pain, the pain of poverty, of need that they're feeling, is sometimes an indicator of a moral wrong. There's no law broken, there's no contract of services, but Nabal's harvest was due in part to David's protection. And David's point was, how can you be so niggardly and mean-spirited with your property? And Nabal's servants, this is the important bit in this passage, they admit this and they tell the boss, David is like a wall around us. He is our protection. We are safe because his men are there. And when Nabal was miserly and insulting towards David, David loses it. And he says to his men, strap on your swords. I'm going to kill everybody there. I mean, we're not arguing the moral, the moral of that principle, but that was his response. And almost every generation, you've seen, has seen the spectacle of the haves and the have-nots battling it out for maintenance of their oppression or freedom from it, until the have-nots take over and get their own turn to become oppressive tyrants in their parliament buildings. It's happened again and again. And so at this point, in a way, David wanted to smash the system down. He wanted to take it for himself and kill Nabal. Okay. See, the world starts from the outside, an outward condition to change the inner man. But the gospel, and that's what I'm getting to here, works in reverse. It starts with the heart. Politics operates on the principles that if you make the circumstances perfect, then people will be perfect or approaching perfection. But the gospel is the opposite. It starts changing the inside, the inward proclivities that make this man Nabal into a tyrant and this man David into a murderer. Okay, you see, it's like this. Vice leads to poverty, but don't forget that poverty leads to vice. Are you with me? So, I mean, think about this. Why were those men outlaws? There were some thieves and bad ones among David's men, I've no doubt. But David himself was only there because he'd been wrongly persecuted. He'd been cast out for no good reason except of Saul's jealousy, you remember. So it was unjust. And he'd been emotionally trodden down, banished, evicted, excluded for no reason. So are you going to expect a logical, calm response out of these people who've had a bad deal turned to them? Are you going to expect them to be fair and say, oh, well, Nabal's worked hard? You see, that kind of rationality comes from the luxury of position. You can afford to be charitable and affable when you've got it. But when you haven't, the pain drives you. Do you hear? It's an important principle. What do you think God's saying to us through this passage? See, I do believe that the Bible contains life principles. That is, principles by which human life is to be lived. This is not just for church games. It's not just for a religious elite or a sort of a special holy way of thinking. It's the real business of being alive. It's life itself. And the Bible doesn't create the facts of our humanity. It makes them known. It reveals them. It shows. So it's not saying behave like David. He's saying think about how David behaved and try to understand. It's like the gospel doesn't make God our Father, but it authoritatively reveals that he is our Father. It doesn't create the duty of being unselfish and loving one another. David, love Nabal, he's your brother. It reveals that truth is an old command, John said, which you've had from the beginning. It's always been the case. It's always been the case. And we're called to live like Jesus. To live like Jesus in the world. We're called from the world to live within the world. But there should be no surprise that this political stuff of which I've spoken, and the rights and the wrongs, coincides with the life that is in Jesus. And modern economic theory catches up with the call of the gospel and the summons of an awakened heart that you either have selfishness or love, right? You either have selfishness or love. You either have revolution or fairness, some form of democracy. You either have power struggle one way or the other. And Abigail comes into the picture. Little sweet Abigail, who is described as beautiful and wise, who captures David's heart and he eventually marries her. But in this bit, she's Nabal's wife, and she stands between the two, so to speak. Without telling Nabal, she gets a couple of truckloads of goodies, of loads of bread and masses of food and stuff, brings them out, and she bows her head before David. And so she's like the voice of generosity and unselfishness, and standing between the catastrophe of revolution, between ignorance of Nabal and the violence of David. She's like the Holy Spirit, man. It's amazing. She stands between and points to a third way. And she does this by admitting that though David has no property, he does have dignity. And that's what we miss when we deal with poor people, isn't it? Let's leave it there for the minute, and I'll finish off tomorrow. God bless you.